Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and this is the Keto Made Simple podcast.
Hi everyone, Dr. Eric Westman here. Welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online. But sometimes I get to interview the movers and shakers in the world, medical and non-medical, and it's my great pleasure today to have Laura. And on your YouTube videos that I watch, you didn't say your last name, so I don't know how to pronounce it.
Laura Spath, which is a happy coincidence that most people thought my channel's name was Laura's Path, but my last name is just Spath. And so my Instagram is kind of my first and last name all pushed together. And it usually takes people a while to realize that it's just my first and last name, not my path or my journey. But I think it's a happy coincidence.
Well, Laura Spath, thank you for coming on the channel. So my background, I'm a physician, internal medicine, obesity medicine, got introduced to the low-carb, keto, now carnivore, low-carb sorts of eating 25 years ago. And so we started researching this kind of low-carb sort of diet. And much to our surprise, and to a lot of people's surprise even today, it turned out to be healthy. And now it's been studied so much, it may actually be the most studied healthy diet that there is. It's just hard to convince people that. So welcome. And so I guess my patients are instructed to have a little bit of vegetables. I can kind of call it a carnivore-ish sort of program where you eat as much as you want of meat, poultry, fish, and shellfish, and eggs. And then I wonder if you can help clarify. I'm a little confused of whether I can have coffee and tea, or because lions don't have coffee, should I not have coffee? If I want to get in the carnivore world, I'm still kind of a little confused. But then I watched YouTube author or influencers and cookbook authors and Sean Baker and other influencers. Well, he's a physician, but talk and teach the carnivore diet. And in my clinic, I see people coming in now at Duke. I've been there for 20 years doing this sort of program, where it certainly doesn't seem immediately bad or harmful. And so I'm very curious. Your name, of course, popped up, your family's experience. How did you get into this carnivore diet, and what has been your experience?
So you have a background for 20 years in studying obesity medicine. I was obese for 20 years. And so I have a very long history of just being obese. I was raised very simple. We lived in the very rural environment. We grew all of our own vegetables. My mom made homemade bread. We had meat that my dad hunted or was from a local farmer that someone had given us. So it was a very simple life, and we were pretty healthy. And then, right around the time I was going through puberty, my family had some loss and some trauma, and our whole world shifted, and the way that we ate shifted. And I was then shifted from an all whole foods, homegrown diet to boxed foods, processed foods, fast foods. And really at that point, my health and my weight kind of got out of control. And I started really this lifestyle of gaining and losing weight and this roller coaster yo-yo diet. And I have been on pretty much every diet you can imagine, just trying to lose weight over the years. I, did the Weight Watchers points. I did like this Bible study weight loss program. I did calorie counting. I lived on lean cuisines. I went vegan for a while because I watched a documentary that said you should go vegan. And I really tried all of those different things. And I usually could lose weight initially, but I just could never stick to it. And so my weight crept up and up and up. I got married. We had a baby right away. My husband found out he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when we were pregnant with our first child, and got on the medications. Doctor said, just take medications. You'll be fine. Maybe you should lose some weight. But both of us, kept gaining and gaining weight. And I really spent the majority of my 20s, like well over 200 pounds. I topped out at 263 pounds, which is actually more than I was 9 months pregnant with my second child. So, he was almost 2 years old, and I realized I weigh more now than I did with him when I went into labor with him. My health is out of control. I looking back on my blood work, I was pre-diabetic, but nobody told me that I was pre-diabetic. And my A1C was 0.1 away from being diabetic. And no doctor even told me that. They just always said your blood work came back within normal range. My husband's diabetes was out of control at the time. You know, it's a complicated story, but he almost died from a diabetic complication. He got a small infection. When you're diabetic, your body's not able to fight off those infections. And that small infection turned into necrotizing fasciitis, which is a flesh-eating bacteria. And he spent months in the hospital having dozens of surgeries, and we were calling family and friends to come say goodbye. And, you know, through all of this, no one ever said anything to us about our health and maybe a doctor here or there would say to lose weight, which, to be honest, I don't think they would do nowadays. Like, I think now there's even a bigger fear of telling people to lose weight. But maybe that was it, but there was never any suggestions on how we should change our diet and what we should do about it. And, you know, a year after my husband had almost died, he was doing a lot of research about how did I contract this infection? And he also found out that 70% of people who get necrotizing fasciitis get it again. And that's typically because they don't change their lifestyle.
Right.
And so in that research, he realized that it was simply because of his diabetes and the fact that his A1C was like 11.6 at the time when he was on medication.
So that's very, very high.
Very high.
That would reflect the blood sugar in the 300s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they were ready to put him on insulin, and because the metformin wasn't even enough to control his diabetes anymore.
Well, I have to say your experience is not uncommon.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people, I think doctors, either they see the prediabetes so commonly, they just assume that it's normal, and then doctors will manage diabetes with medications. Although I have to say today, doctors, I think, will say you have to lose weight, but then they'll also say, so take this shot.
Yeah.
That's the sarcastic view of all the people with shots today. But so you don't have a medical background, right? And so, I mean, of course you're going to follow the doctor's orders. When was that wake up call or that moment that maybe the diet is related to this?
Yeah, I think it was honestly like finding different doctors. So when my husband was first diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, he did cut his sugar back a little bit, thinking that, you know, he needed to go lower carb. I wouldn't even call us low carb then, but he was trying to cut out ice creams and some of the more damaging things, which, you know, doesn't last long because we both have just such an addiction to the processed foods. And so he had lost a little bit of weight. So we knew initially that some type of low carb was going to be helpful for him. And, you know, this was 2018. Keto was kind of the big boom at the time. And it was really the beginning of this, you know, keto popularity. And we started doing some research, you know, and learning from doctors about keto, hearing from people like Dr. Jason Fung and people like yourself, and digging into a lot of the research that was out there around keto and understanding. Yeah.
So internet doctors, not your
internet doctors. Yes.
Well,
no in-person doctors, but we kind of did need to be convinced by a doctor, but it was the internet doctors. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and of course, I always ask my patients or people watching my YouTube channel to consider the source.
Yes.
And typically I do hold doctors who are in clinic in higher esteem, you know, doctors who are using this in a clinic. So then, well, that's great to see the influence the internet has. In fact, it was Ken Berry who got up at the meeting I was at, Dr. Berry, who said, you know, how many of you think you know the people on YouTube? And they all raised their hand, and you said, look, this is so influential. So, but how do you know who to trust? And then how did you take the next step?
Yeah, that was a big part of it. And I think that's why somebody like Dr. Berry, Dr. Fung, and then I think combined with hearing people's personal experiences also was a big part of it, where I could see their research, and a lot of it made sense. I mean, when we started hearing about the fasting and the lowering your baseline glucose and carnivore and cutting out all of those things, like a lot of things clicked for us in terms of understanding why my husband was diabetic, why we were both obese. And, we had started keto in 2018 just as a way to lose weight and go on another diet. And pretty quickly we found out about carnivore. And that was the biggest eye opener for us. Like my husband was on board to not eat vegetables. He was instantly, oh, I don't have to eat vegetables. Okay, done. Like it's like a toddler.
It's amazing how many folks are really like that. I mean, when you look back to childhood, you hear that you have to eat the vegetables. So maybe there's a natural tendency to not want to have them.
Absolutely. And so he was instantly convinced the minute he heard, Dr. Baker talk about carnivore and how you don't need vegetables, he was sold. Took a little more convincing because I like vegetables. I had loved a good salad. I thought I needed salads to lose weight. And so it wasn't until I kind of cut out the vegetables for a while that I realized how many of my other health issues that I thought were just normal actually went away when I cut out the vegetables. So to me, that was shocking. And even now, it's not that I hate vegetables or salad. It's just that they don't agree with my body and they wreck my digestive system. They don't make me feel good. And so I just can't have them for health reasons.
So this has been a learning experience and all. And how did you first see that you were getting benefit?
Kind of by accident. My husband does all the cooking in the house. I'm very lucky. So he was cooking all of our food for a week or so. And I just happened to not have any vegetables. And so I didn't even think about it. Well, on the end of the week, I had like a big salad where everything was kind of carnivore, but then there was a bunch of lettuce involved. And instantly I was bloated. I had digestive issues. Like I didn't realize that all of my, constipation and all of those other major issues that I've been having for years kind of went away when I started doing carnivore. And then just simply having a big salad instantly made me feel really terrible. And it kind of made everything click. And so I was like, okay, maybe I'll give this carnivore thing like a real try. And that's when I kind of said, like, I'll try it for a month or so and see how I feel. And the other benefits that happened, I didn't even think about, was just taking out all sugar. So, I don't eat vegetables still to this day, 7 years later, because they don't agree with my body. They cause me inflammation, digestive issues, joint pains. I mean, just tons of issues digestively. But I now, cutting out things like fruit and the keto treats and a lot of the nuts, I didn't realize how addicted to those that I was and how much they actually were causing me to be thrown off track. It increased a lot of cravings for me. There's a wide variety of people in the carnivore community talking about like all plants are killing you, fruits and vegetables and everything are toxic. But then I think there's also people like myself who just say that I just do better without them. And something like a little handful of blueberries is probably has health benefits. Maybe there's antioxidants and all the things. But that little handful of blueberries for me wakes up this part of my brain that was eating a pint of Ben & Jerry's every day. And it's so much easier for me to have no blueberries than it is to stop at a handful of blueberries and not have that handful of blueberries turn into a pint of ice cream.
And I mean, have you tested that even now, 7 years into this? I find that 20 years of pretty low carb, pretty much all the time, I can have a blueberry or two or quarter cup even, or I can actually have a high carb meal and then stop. Although I suffer the consequences of bloating and all that. But have you, so I wonder, are you thinking of adding back carbs ever, or still it tugs you? And of course, early on, we advise people, if you can't moderate, abstain, right? Because like a cigarette, if you're quitting smoking and you still have a cigarette every day, you're not going to quit.
Right.
So are you satisfied?
I'm not somebody who will probably ever be able to moderate any amount of like carbs or sugar. I am not perfect by any means, but I know that anytime I have tried to have those other foods, it has always been a slippery slope for me. So I might,
But you have that crystal ball.
Yes.
No, no.
No.
We do the best we can.
Yeah, I never tell anybody. People are like, so do you plan on being carnivore for the rest of your life? Like, I can't say yes to that. Like,
Wow.
honestly, that stresses me out to think that I'm never going to be able to have some of these like foods that I loved so much before. Like, from an emotional perspective, like the minute you tell me you could never have those things again, it's all I think about. And so I am still in this place of saying, not now, maybe later, maybe someday. But I know right now it's not something that's going to be helpful for me. So, yeah.
So to recap,
Yeah.
you were having these health issues, tried all sorts of different things, you and your husband,
Yeah.
found these internet doctors talking about low carb and keto and intermittent fasting and tried it, got some good results, diabetes, and you lost some weight, I assume, on keto.
Yeah. Initially on keto.
And then switched to a carnivore type eating, which, so what type of carnivore are you? Do you have the coffee and tea, or are you, more like, well, if a wolf can't have it, I won't have it?
Probably closer. I would say somewhere in the middle. I actually was never a coffee drinker to begin with. It's just never been something that I've enjoyed. I would rather have sodas and things. Yes. So the sparkling waters to me just taste like the soda machine ran out, like now I have actually like on and off. This is even worse than all of those things, is having something like a Diet Coke, which is terrible for you. And that's like, that's kind of been my like one vice that I've had over the years when I'm like really dying and having major cravings. Like for me, that's been a replacement for, or like what Dr. Sivas calls a bridge food. I certainly think it's terrible. And obviously a wolf was not eating those things. And I don't encourage people to have them. But for me, it's making the better choice. And I think that is sometimes the problem in the carnivore community, is that we preach perfection. And that is not realistic for most people. And to be honest, if I had to eat raw organ meats, if I could never eat in a restaurant, if I had to eat only grass-finished, organic, all of these specialty meats with no seasonings, I would go back to eating pizza and ice cream. Like, it's just, I have to enjoy what I'm doing. I am never going to be one of those people that's like food for fuel. Like, I am just going to eat to fuel my body and I get no pleasure out of food. Like, you don't get to be, over 250 pounds if you felt that way about food. Okay. You're that way because food is pleasurable for you. And it's kind of tapping into something emotional. So I eat with a lot of seasonings. Try to avoid, MSG and sugars, and I'm careful about the ingredients in those seasonings. Same thing with some type of sauce. But I eat in restaurants, and I just make sure things are meat based. But I think that the seasonings that we eat, eating with Chipotle barbecue blends and garlic and all these different things, chimichurri occasionally, somebody might consider those non-carnivore, and I definitely get accused of not being the perfect carnivore often, but I am doing it in a way that is helpful for me and is keeping me healthy. And it's also, I'm doing it in a way that I can stick to. And that's really my biggest advice for people, is if you having coffee in the mornings lets you have something that people are very ritualistic about their coffee. It's like a very big part of their day. And it's really important for this routine that they enjoy. And I think if it's not causing you any health issues, then you should keep that in and it's totally fine. But I think something like having berries or vegetables, those are things that maybe I could lie to myself that I could moderate, or they cause me health issues. Like, if the food is not negatively affecting you, or it's not causing you to be triggered and overeat other things, I think you should include those things. So like, what does the perfect carnivore diet look like? Well, I think that's pretty different for everybody, where the spices that I eat might cause someone else with an autoimmune condition to have a eczema flare up or some type of autoimmune flare up. I tolerate those things fine. And I think that, we all have to kind of figure out what works for us.
So I wonder, I learned how to do this from two of my patients 25 years ago, actually. They went out, they read some books, came in and taught me. And I'm learning that I learned from my patients a lot. And now let me just transfer this. What have you learned in terms of followers and comments on it's just amazing what information can be gleaned, assuming that people aren't lying and they're they're talking the truth. But how many, in your experience, can a lot of people do sort of the relaxed version of carnivore that you're doing and still get benefits from it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think if anything, you have to figure out what is it that you're trying to heal and what are you trying to accomplish. So if your goal is just mostly weight loss like me, I think you can be a lot more flexible than if your goal is to heal a major autoimmune condition. I think you have to go all in, and you may not even want to, but that's kind of the only way that you can heal. Um, I mean, this is a conversation for another time, but I also think sometimes if the food alone is not healing you, then there's something else going on and you need to get to the root cause of, like, the carnivore diet is amazing, but it also only can resolve things that are food related. Like sometimes it's not this magic cure for every ailment that's ever existed. And we all oftentimes have to get to the root cause. I think that there are many people who can include some sauces and some spices and a few other things like that. But I also think there is a lot of people that lie to themselves or are trying to fool themselves that they can handle more than they can. And it is a very slippery slope. You know, the first YouTube video I put out, like I had posted a picture on Instagram and said, like, I lost 120 pounds. Let me tag some people that I learned from. I tagged Dr. Barry and Dr. Baker and Dr. Fung and said, thank you for everything that you share. And that picture kind of blew up and people started asking a lot of questions about how I lost weight. So that's kind of how I ended up sharing online, was accidentally just trying to like answer questions that people had. And I made my first YouTube video basically saying, here's how I lost weight and here's what I did in the timeline of that. And through that video, I had casually mentioned, you know, I started with like keto, I could eat a spoonful of peanut butter, but then the next thing you know, I was like hiding in the pantry and I ate the whole jar. And it's
Well,
yeah,
guilty.
yeah, that's one of those shameful moments that I kind of just messaged in passing. But what I've learned from people, and actually what my biggest eye-opening moment through all of this is, that's not uncommon. And that this part of my brain that would cause me to drive out of my way and drive through the drive-through on my way home from work and eat something and then stop at a gas station and hide the trash and throw it away. And like this part of like obsessiveness about food and eating when nobody was looking. And like, I thought I was the only person that ever dealt with that before. And I felt very alone and very isolated. And it wasn't until I started mentioning those things and how people connected to it and shared that they had those same experiences. I was like, oh, this is not me being broken. Like this is something that we are struggling with in our society. And it was very comforting for me in a lot of ways. And it really helped me to know that I wasn't alone. And also then it made me want to share even more to try to help other people feel like that they weren't alone in what they were struggling with. So
From here,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
When, in your experience, when should someone consider, you know, if someone's doing keto, LCHF, Mediterranean, or they're, you know, and they're feeling well or got some results.
Yep.
What lingering things, like if someone, have you found people, yourself, of course,
Yeah.
and other people sharing with you at your channel, what other things may be a reason why someone should consider cutting the carbs even more? So I see a carnivore diet as a super low carb
Yes.
diet, right? It's gluten-free, it's FODMAP-free. These are all terms the medical world has, but symptom-wise, what have people fixed by going that next step of no veggies?
So no vegetables, I instantly see people's digestive issues resolve. You know, I have made some pretty embarrassing videos about hemorrhoids and constipation and like, you know, talking about my experience with that. And again, so many people struggled with that. You know, everybody thinks that the minute you go carnivore, you'll never poop again, but it's the opposite. When you cut out the fiber, you know, I was seeing colorectal specialists for years and years, and all they did was tell me to add more fiber. And the minute I cut out all forms of fiber, all of those symptoms that I had completely resolved. And, you know, I was able to not have surgery, and it was honestly very life-changing for me. So, joint pain, inflammation, I think a lot of skin issues, those are all things that people are seeing a lot of healing with by cutting out vegetables. So if you're eating keto and your weight loss is fine and everything's going great, but you're still having a lot of gut issues and bloating and digestive issues, I think it's wonderful to cut out the vegetables. And also, I think, sometimes if your blood sugar is not coming down the way that you want it to, people can overeat things like they think that zucchini and cauliflower and green beans, like those are all low carb. Yeah, in very, very small doses, but they add up very quickly. And they also can cause, a lot of gut issues for people.
So in our strict teaching, the page of foods we use, the limit on leafy greens is 2 cups or 2 fistfuls, and the limit on the vegetables is 1 cup of the non-starchy vegetables, the asparagus, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower. So it's not a whole lot, but I have, even in my practice, seen people go from this amount of vegetable to none, and fixing those things you're talking about. The GI, I joke that I really should be a GI specialist, except, I don't know how to put a tube in people's mouths, and, and that's pretty much what they do. They, of all the the specialties, you would think a GI specialist would know about what the food would do inside, and it's just not part of the training.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's just such little nutritional information in any medical training, and they're only told, not to be insulting to you, but like you're taught in your medical studies to give a prescription to fix an issue and not to change someone's diet, other than like eat less and move more is really the only advice that I think doctors are told to give their patients, unless somebody like you who goes out and does your own research.
One of my patients told me, well, doc, people become a doctor to prescribe drugs or do surgery.
Right.
They don't become a doctor to talk about food.
Right.
Although that's changing. The Obesity Medicine Association, I'm past president of that, teaches doctors who most of them are frustrated with what little they can do with chronic medical conditions. And now there is a culinary medicine component that's a pre-course to the obesity medicine meetings. But again, this is a small subset of doctors who are out of training. But so let me switch gears a little bit. So you're 7 years-ish into eating this way. Aren't you worried about some terrible scurvy? Aren't you worried about, I gave a postdoc training to a university, and one of the first questions from the trainees was, well, everyone's going to get scurvy. And well, it's possible, and there are all sorts of things that may be possible. But I had Amber O'Hearn, who likes to talk about carnivore diets, write a paper about the nutritional adequacy of it, and it actually looked pretty good when you sat down and scientifically looked at it. But you're not a medical professional and not a dietitian, and so aren't you worried that you're going to come precipitously fall off this cliff?
What helps encourage me is knowing some of that research, like what Amber has done, and seeing people that have been doing this for longer than I have. But I also know that I just have to go based on how I feel and where I'm at. Like, my health was terrible. I was seeing 3 and 4 different specialists. I had, I was overweight. I was in such a terrible health position before I started all of this, and now I am so much healthier and I feel so good. Like, shouldn't that count for something? I think sometimes we get a little obsessed with blood work and looking for problems that aren't there, and we don't really just go. And how many times in our lives do we feel terrible and the doctors tell you, no, everything's within normal range? Like, isn't the way that I feel, shouldn't that count for something? And I think we lose a lot of that confidence because of some kind of blood work.
Well, but so you saw your husband's A1C go from what, 13 to
11.9 all the way to 4.9.
11.9, sorry.
Yep.
11.9 to 4.9. That's normal. No diabetes.
Right.
And then he came off some high blood pressure medicines as well.
He was sleeping with a sleep apnea machine to the extent that when we had our kids in the hospital, he had to take his machine to, like, I'm in labor and he's taking a nap with his machine on. Like, he couldn't sleep without it. And he was, within a couple of months, he was off of, dozens of prescriptions. He was off of his machine, and, he's 10 years older than me. So he's like, I got to get healthy. I have this wife and young kids and I have to do something. And now he just turned 50 a couple of months ago, and he's been training Brazilian jiu-jitsu for the last few years. He's goes to the gym every day. He's super active. When at 40, we thought he was going to die. It's like a drastic difference like that. I mean, I'm very confident I'm not going to get scurvy. Okay. But in terms of just how we feel and how healthy we are now, there's nothing that could convince me that 10 years from now, something's going to go wrong, because I know that it was already going wrong when I tried it before.
I was 25 years ago studying the Atkins diet.
Yes.
There was this slide that was made, and I just changed the name of Atkins to LCHF, to Keto, to carnivore. Basically, the patients at the doctor's office and the doctor's scolding him, you fixed your diabetes, you fixed your sleep apnea, you lost 100 pounds, you fixed your high blood pressure.
Right.
But I tell you that diet's going to kill you. Yeah.
Right.
So that's prejudice. It's prejudging. And it's because we were all taught that it was bad.
Right.
And it's not bad. but then as I was thinking about a metaphor to just kind of have people think out of the box, it's as if we were going toward the new world and everyone said we were going to fall off the cliff. But we put people up there looking for the edge of the cliff. So if you started having bleeding gums or
Yes.
corkscrew hairs or some of these, I mean, these are signs of scurvy, right? You wouldn't just blindly follow this, right? You do it, get it checked out. So that's,
I have no interest in like getting regular blood work done because I feel so good, but I do get regular blood work done and share it with my audience, mainly because I am so public and I talk about this, and my goal is to encourage people to give this a try because I think that it would have great healing for them. So I try to be very transparent about my blood work, but I don't think that people getting like all of these in-depth yearly blood work panels is necessary for the average person, as long as you're going based on how you feel.
yeah. And one of the issues is that you're comparing yourself to people who are not medically or metabolically well. Something like 75% of Americans are unwell. And of course they're carb eaters. So you're comparing yourself to carb eaters. And yet I've seen doctors obsess and fearmonger about a couple numbers that are...
cholesterol obviously is the biggest one that everybody is so concerned about, when in reality, I'm sure you believe, and know that the high LDL is not an indication of heart disease or heart attack, or if anything, in women, we need a higher LDL for healthy hormones and to prevent Alzheimer's. And there's so much misunderstanding about cholesterol in general that, I've done research from people like Nina Teicholz, who talks about the demonization of cholesterol is like one of the greatest problems that we have in the modern medical society. And Dr. Philovadia, who wrote a book on, these are all people that obviously I feel confident because of the research that I've done through these internet doctors, that's what keeps me doing it. But I think you can't discredit just personal experience and how you feel. Like, there's probably not a lot of books or information that could convince me that something was good for me if I didn't feel good. And that, I will tell you, I can speak to directly because I went vegan for a while. I was eating 6 times a day. I was doing all the vegetables and the meal preps and the quinoa and all of the things. And I lost 50 pounds doing that. But my hair started falling out and I felt terrible and I had constant headaches and I was sleeping terrible and my digestive system had never been worse. I was having like frequent colonoscopies and just massive, massive digestive issues. Every research that I could find is going to tell you that the vegan diet is great. There's a lot of movies telling you how healthy vegan diet is. So it wasn't that I needed research to convince me. It was that I was doing all this research, but nothing made sense because it wasn't true for me physically. And so then you start looking into where this research funded from and who's paying for these movies. And, all that stuff kind of awakens you to it. So I think research is important, but we have to correlate that to how we feel. And that's been the biggest thing that convinced me to stick to this, was just how much my health improved.
Yeah. And that doesn't matter to a doctor.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just the traditional traditional view will be, let's measure a test, let's diagnose you,
Right.
put you on a medication. So have you talked to your local face-to-face doctors? How does that play out?
I usually just avoid it, to be honest, because I am not looking for, I mean, granted, I haven't been to the doctor in a long time other than to get blood work done. And usually it's like, what's actually crazy was I went in and I was like, I would love to have like a full hormone panel. And just, it's been a long time. Everybody says like carnivore tanks your thyroid and carnivore wrecks your hormones for women. And so I was like, great, let me just get a full panel and show people what that looks like. But she was saying to me like, okay, what symptoms are you having for me to run this test? Like,
Didn't want to do the
needed to code, right? She needed something to be wrong with me so she could code it in the system. And so it wasn't until I just like kind of said things like, you know, I had to, she's like, well, she started naming things. Do you have short cycles? Do you have pain? Do you have like hair? Like, what's going on with you that would let me run this test for you? And so I kind of just said like, okay, just give me the numbers. And then I take those numbers and like go talk to a naturopath or go look at them myself in the research that I'm doing. But you know, they're not allowed to run tests on you until something is wrong.
Well, they can, but it won't necessarily
Be
get cleared.
covered.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
true.
So that's another just quirk of the medical care that we get, that if we're in the insurance system, the doctor is going to feel constrained by what insurance pays for. Well, but you know, it makes sense because all that needs to happen. I see a few people, they get an extra fee. You know, did you know that the Duke sent me a bill for $350 for that lab test? I'm like, I'm sorry. Well, you know, so, but other doctors who are kind of growing up knowing all this stuff sort of say, well, insurance limits me. And so I'm going to just be honest about what I recommend. And then, and they end up treating people who are upper class or middle upper class because they can afford to go outside the insurance system. I decided to stay in the insurance system at a clinic at a university in order to, on purpose to understand what insurance does cover, what is necessary, what's not necessary. But then I grew up in the VA hospital system, the Veterans Affairs system, which was kind of different. It taught stewardship of resources back then, and I don't know if it does still. But so I would always wonder, kind of like your doctor, why do we need this test?
Right.
Well, maybe we could code carnivore diet as an abnormality, and then you could get paid for to check all these things. Actually, sometimes I do code hyperlipidemia. If someone comes in, they're lean mass hyper responder, I think, but I'll code to get the blood test covered. Even though I don't think hyperlipidemia is a bad thing for this person, it's just an observation. But you know, that there's a lot of nuance there. And if a doctor sees someone that doesn't know how to compute in their usual system, I understand that reluctance. Now, Dave Feldman, with the cholesterol code and the studies going on, created a company, ownyourlabs.com, to kind of get around this whole thing of needing a doctor to get a lab test, which is kind of cool. But then you need to have people to interpret it for you. Well, so I wonder, after this time, who are your go-to, who should my followers follow? Who do you find is the most reputable sources?
You know, I've named a lot of names right now. And I think too, that it is interesting because if I wasn't still in this world sharing this information, I probably wouldn't be consuming this content because I've fixed my situation. I know what's happening. I would move on with my life. There isn't this need for me to be constantly consuming information because I know what works for me. And so I like to stay up to date on things, but you know, my YouTube videos are on like, you know, other political things or home renovation channels. And like, you know, I'm not usually watching a lot of health and wellness content because I go back to living my normal life. And that's what's interesting about this space too, is you tend to have people who are like just getting started coming through and everybody gets very obsessed with it for a while. And then a lot of people just figure out what works for them. Or, I mean, unfortunately, some fall off and go back to doing what they were doing before. And then you don't want to watch it and feel guilty. But also then we figure out what's working for us and we move on with our lives and we are healthy. So, people that whenever I see their podcast pop up on my app, I still always listen to is, Ben Bickman has been on several podcasts lately, and I've really been enjoying the stuff that he's been putting out there. You mentioned Dave Feldman is another one that, I like to pop into some of these conferences occasionally, but I tend to go to the conferences like the low carb conference in Boca I went to several years in a row, where I know you spoke there. I tend to follow people that are putting out this research and just finding ways that I can help explain things to people, listening to people like Dr. Fung and maybe he's not even carnivore, but I think that he shares things in a way that helps people understand the mechanisms of lowering their blood sugar. And so I always recommend people kind of go after some more of these doctors and reputable sources. There are a lot of people who share lifestyle tips online. I personally don't watch that stuff just because I'm living my life and I already know kind of what works for me in my life. The one thing I will say, the beauty of the internet now is that there is so much information that is out there. When I first started, there was a couple of these doctors that existed, but there was nobody out here sharing, there was no carnivore influencers back then. Nobody had, especially no women had YouTube channels that were just talking about here's what I ate and here's what I'm doing every day, which is kind of why I think I was able to grow so fast right away. It's because nobody else was doing that. And now there's dozens and dozens and there's wonderful resources, lots of people sharing great ideas. The downside to that sometimes is it kind of puts our head on a swivel where you're looking for the next best, quickest protocol for the routine, for the hack, for the, if I do this, I'm promised these results. And so sometimes I think too much information ends up getting people really overwhelmed, and they're switching from high fat carnivore to lion diet to egg fasts to low fat sparing modified fast, and they're kind of bouncing all over the place, and then essentially they're not getting the results that they want because they haven't been consistent, and whatever it is that they're doing doesn't work for them. I'm never gonna do a sardine fast because I would never eat I'm not going to eat 8 cans of sardines a day for a week to lose weight because I would rather eat pizza. Some of those things are really hard for people. And so I love that there's information out there. I would encourage people to kind of take what they're watching with this filter of, would this work for me? And not, I made some changes recently. I lost some more weight recently that I had kind of been carrying over the last couple of years from eating too much dairy, which is that's a big, it's carnivore. And all of a sudden I had all of these comments of people going, oh wait, I thought I could drink milk. That's carnivore. And they don't yes, it's technically a carnivore food, but that food does not, I would gain weight and I'm never going to lose weight and it's going to impact my blood sugar and things. So, I think it's important for people to know the mechanisms of what's working for them by listening to the doctors, and understanding, what is my health issue? What am I trying to solve for? Because that is going to indicate what approach should you be taking. Should you be doing low carb sparing modified fast? Should you be doing high fat carnivore? What approach you should take is based on what are you trying to do? Heal, lose weight. There's a lot of different things. A lot of people need to go the lion diet approach, which is meat, salt, water, that Michaela Peterson does, if they are trying to heal similar things that she does. And so
reversing rheumatoid arthritis.
Correct. Yeah, those are major things where you can't eat like I do, because my goals are clear out my digestive issues, lose weight, not spiral into food addiction. If that's what you're looking for, you probably could eat similarly to me, but it doesn't also mean that your macros would be the same or your portions are going to be the same, because we are individual people. And so, dig into the research, look at some of those. I've mentioned a lot of different doctors you and I both have in this chat, which I think is important. And then you can get ideas from people who share things, but just be careful not to bounce around too much and get yourself all tied up in knots where you go back to doing what you were doing before.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's true, but I have to imagine that what you talked and said to me is that you've done research on this, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. You're ticking off all of the people that I listen to and learn from, and then have come out to meetings to actually kind of kick the tires of the whole organizations and people, and that's just
Right.
amazing and awesome. And so I have to imagine that your natural tendency to do those things is what attracts people, not just your own story. It's you've looked around, well, you and your husband.
Yeah.
So that combined story is powerful as well. That's just awesome. So you're like a super user, researcher,
Yes.
teacher of information that unfortunately is still kind of marginalized, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so just kind of to wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so, is there hope for this? Is this just another your carnivore or low carb? Is this just another thing that's gonna blip away, and processed food and medicines are just gonna rule?
I don't think that carnivore itself will ever be mainstream. I think you're never going to convince people that they don't need vegetables and that, all plants are killing you in this whole thing. And I don't think that matters really. Like the goal is let's cut out seed oils and let's talk about ultra processed foods. And, I think trying to like convince the world that they need to be carnivore is like, it's yelling at the ocean and telling the tide to stop. Like it's not going to happen. But I think the benefit is that we can focus on informing the masses on, and I think continue to share. There's a lot of people that are going to be helped by going carnivore, but you get them there by getting them to cut out the seed oils, to cut out the processed foods, to cut out the sugar in a lot of cases. And the more that you can get people into those baby steps, then the more they're going to realize how good they feel and the more willing that they'll be to go down the rabbit hole of looking at like, okay, wait, why is high cholesterol from red meat not a problem? Or, what is the ratio of, it's not high cholesterol, it's high triglycerides are very bad. So, but it's higher LDL is not quite as bad. Like getting people to go down that route, I think is more helpful. I'm very confident that we are going to make positive changes. I think the current political movement, this Make America Healthy Again movement, and what, Robert Kennedy is doing is going to be fantastic for making a lot of positive changes. It's scary how the most vulnerable people in our society are the ones that are tied to the food pyramids or the my plates or the federal regulations around food. I don't have to eat what the federal guidelines tell me to eat because I am healthy and have money and I can make my own choices. But like you mentioned earlier, people that are poor, people that are in the school systems, people that are in hospitals, in nursing homes, they don't have a choice. My husband was hospitalized for months from a diabetic complication, and his diet consisted of pizza and chicken fingers and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And then they gave him insulin shots every day. I have a picture of him two-fisting peanut butter and jelly sandwiches while they pulled up his gown and his belly was purple from insulin shots. Like that's what the medical system treats this with. I think we are several cycles away from that changing. I am very hopeful that those types of things change. Do I think hospitals are going to be providing carnivore meals to people? No. But I think that's okay because I think that the average person can find some balance between carnivore and keto and low carb where they find the balance that keeps them the healthiest. And I do think that transitioning these restaurants that are transitioning to cook in beef tallow, and we're making really positive strides with what Nina Teicholz is doing for the health regulations, and just what's happening in our country right now is pushing us in a really positive direction.
Yeah. So what's your day job again?
I work in like a normal corporate sales job. It's a software company, and I do like some, lead a training team for this software company.
Okay. Well, but you've had some leadership
Yeah.
training, but then got into it from your own story with questions. And, the way I see this is like, we need hundreds of people doing this, thousands of people doing this, sharing the information, and to lower that hurdle of getting into the internet world is
Right.
huge. And thank you for what you're doing. It's amazing what changing the food can do. And it's, disappointing to me now that the medical world just isn't interested.
Right.
And so that's important for people to know, that you can do so much by changing the food on your own. And I think your YouTube channel is phenomenal. I recommend people going to it to learn the detail of how to do carnivore. It's Thank you for sharing. To me, that it's still a little, I don't really want to go around my house showing things to people. Yeah, this is a research thing for me, rather. So it's really cool that you feel comfortable doing that.
But I think that's the balance that people need. And, I talk to people in my everyday life, and that's not everybody has to start a YouTube channel, but you can live in a way that you share your experience with those around you. And, I have people that have never watched my YouTube videos, but they just work with me in a corporate environment, and they've started carnivore and they've healed things and they've given it a try. And then their mom starts because they did it as well. And there's this ripple effect that can happen when you impact those around you. And so you living this way and talking about it when people have questions, because if you're, especially nowadays, when you're losing weight, people are going to assume you're on a shot of some kind. But just talking about openly, what it's healed for you and sharing with people when you're asked, I think is a really helpful way of just passing along that information.
Absolutely. Where can people find you? What are you up to these days? The YouTube channel is.
That's the best way. You can just search for Laura Spath on YouTube, and you can find all of that information there. And then I have a community through a platform called Locals, where, that's where I don't do coaching, but it's like a, group where you can post your meals and get advice from myself and a lot of other people that are in there. It tends to be people who struggle with similar things that I do, and we all can encourage each other and talk about it. And that's it. lauraespath.locals.com. But mostly you can find all that on YouTube as well, and all those links and everything. That's the best place to find just what I'm eating.
Thanks again. And thanks for spending time with me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye now.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our YouTube membership for early access and exclusive live Q&As with me. Just click the join button below or support us with a PayPal in the description.